My boss fired me after 12 years. He didn't know I owned the company. My name is Daniel Harper, and for 12 years, I was the person everyone called when something went wrong. A broken system, an angry client, a deal that was about to collapse. I was always the person who fixed things. But one Monday morning, I walked into my office and found a letter sitting on my desk. No warning, no conversation, just 3 words printed at the top. Employment termination notice. My boss, Richard Coleman, had fired me. The same man who once told everyone I was the backbone of the company. The same man who called me family during meetings. The same man who shook my hand when I helped save the company millions of dollars. Now, he looked at me like I was a problem he needed to remove. And the reason? He said I was too comfortable. He said the company needed younger energy. He said my time had passed. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask for another chance. I simply picked up my belongings, walked out of the building, and smiled. Because Richard had no idea who he had just fired. For years, everyone believed I was just a senior employee, a quiet manager who stayed late, a person who avoided attention. I never posted about my success. I never showed expensive cars. I never talked about money. Because I learned something early in life. The more people know about what you have, the more they change how they treat you. 10 years earlier, I had sold my technology company and invested that money into different businesses. One of those investments was a private holding company. And that holding company owned 54% of the company where Richard was now the CEO. The company he thought belonged to him. The company where he had just fired me. I met Richard when the company was struggling. Back then, it was a small operation with talented employees, but terrible leadership. I joined as a consultant. Within months, I helped restructure contracts, improve systems, and bring back major clients. Revenue doubled, then tripled. People started calling Richard a genius. But the truth was different. Richard was good at taking credit. Very good. He knew how to stand in front of cameras, how to give speeches, how to make himself look like the reason behind every success. And honestly, I didn't care. I never needed applause. As long as the company grew, I was happy. But slowly things changed. Richard started surrounding himself with people who agreed with everything he said. Anyone who questioned him became a problem, including me. The first warning sign came when I noticed financial reports didn't match. Small things. Numbers moved around. Budgets changed without explanation. Certain executives received huge bonuses while departments were being cut. I brought my concerns to Richard. He smiled. Daniel, you're overthinking things. That sentence told me everything. Because good leaders listen. Bad leaders dismiss. After that conversation, I noticed something else. People who worked with me started disappearing. One manager was transferred. Another suddenly resigned. Anyone who questioned Richard slowly disappeared from the company. Then came the final meeting. Richard called me into his office. He sat behind his expensive desk. The same desk I helped pay for through company growth. He looked at me and said, Daniel, I think it's time you move on. I looked at him. After 12 years, he nodded. It's business. That sentence was interesting because Richard wanted to make it about business. So I decided to treat it like business. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked away. That evening, I made one phone call. Not to Richard, not to HR, not to anyone inside the company. I called the board chairman, a man who knew the real ownership structure. I said only one sentence. Start the ownership review. The next morning, everything changed. At 8 a.m., every employee received an email. Subject: Emergency Leadership Evaluation. By noon, the board had frozen executive decisions. By afternoon, financial investigators were reviewing company records. And by the end of the week, Richard discovered the truth. The quiet employee he fired was the person who had the power to remove him. When Richard entered the boardroom, his confidence was gone. For the first time, he wasn't the person controlling the room. He was the person answering questions. He looked at me and said, You planned this. I shook my head. No, you did this yourself. Because the truth was simple. I didn't destroy Richard's career. He did. His arrogance, his decisions, his belief that everyone below him was disposable. Those were the things that brought him down. Months later, the company changed completely. New leadership came in, Employees who were ignored finally had voices. The toxic culture disappeared, and I returned to the company. Not as an employee, as the owner. But I never changed the way I lived. I still drove the same car. I still wore simple clothes. I still avoided attention. Because the biggest lesson I learned was this: never underestimate the quiet person in the room. The person who says the least may be the one watching everything. And sometimes, the person you think has no power is the person who has been holding it all along. The strangest part about everything that happened was not Richard losing his position. It was how quickly people changed once they realized the truth. For years, Richard had built an image. He wanted everyone to believe he was the reason the company survived. He wanted people to believe every success came from his leadership. And because I stayed quiet, many people believed him. That was the price of staying invisible. People only see what you show them. And I had spent years showing them almost nothing. After the board investigation started, the entire company entered a period of uncertainty. Employees were nervous. Rumors spread everywhere. Some people thought the company was being sold. Others thought executives were going to be replaced. But what surprised everyone was how many employees came forward with stories about Richard. Things they had ignored. Things they were afraid to mention. A marketing manager explained how Richard had taken credit for her campaign. A financial analyst revealed that he had questioned unusual spending months earlier, but was told to stay quiet. A project director admitted he left because he realized honesty was no longer valued. The pattern became obvious. Richard didn't lose his position because of one mistake. He lost it because years of small decisions finally caught up with him. One afternoon, I received an email from Richard. The subject line was simple: "Can we talk?" I stared at it for several minutes. The old Daniel would have immediately responded. The old Daniel would have tried to explain. The old Daniel would have wanted him to understand why what he did was wrong. But I wasn't that person anymore. I agreed to meet, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted closure. We met at a small coffee shop near the company headquarters. For the first time in years, Richard looked different. No expensive suit, no confident as might, no group of people around him agreeing with everything he said. Just Richard, a person, not a title. He looked at me and laughed quietly. I never saw this coming. I took a sip of coffee. That was the point. He looked confused. "You had all of this for years." I nodded. "Yes." "Why?" That question stayed with me. Because the answer was complicated. I didn't hide my success because I wanted to trick people. I hid it because I wanted to know who respected me when they thought I had nothing. Richard looked away. Then he said something unexpected. "You know what bothers me the most?" I waited. "I treated you like you were replaceable." I didn't respond. Because he was right. That was exactly what happened. For years, he saw me as an employee, a resource, a person who existed to make his job easier. He never saw the person behind the work. A few months later, the company officially announced new leadership. I became chairman of the board. But I made one decision immediately. The company would not become a place where power mattered more than people. I created a new review system. Executives were evaluated not only on profits, but also on how they treated employees. Managers who developed people were rewarded. Managers who destroyed morale were removed. Because I learned something important from Richard. A company does not collapse because of one bad decision. It collapses when good people become afraid to speak. The most surprising reaction came from employees who had barely spoken to me before. People started coming to my office, not because they wanted favors, not because they knew my position, but because they finally understood something. I had been listening the entire time. One employee said something I never forgot. "Everyone thought you were quiet because you didn't have anything to say." He smiled. "But you were quiet because you were paying attention." That sentence stayed with me. Because it was true. Silence is often misunderstood. People think quiet means weak. They think patience means someone doesn't notice. They think kindness means someone cannot fight back. But sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is preparation. A year after everything happened, I visited my old office. The same office where Richard had fired me. The desk was gone. The furniture was different. The nameplate had been removed. But I remembered that morning clearly. The letter on my desk. The disappointment. The feeling of being dismissed after giving years of my life. At the time, it felt like the end. But looking back, it was actually the moment everything changed. Because if Richard had never fired me, I might have stayed invisible forever. His biggest mistake was thinking he was removing a problem. He was actually revealing the truth. People often think revenge means making someone suffer. But I learned something different. Real revenge is growth. Real revenge is becoming successful without becoming bitter. Real revenge is proving someone wrong without losing yourself. Richard wanted to make me feel powerless. Instead, he reminded me of my power. He thought my quiet nature was weakness. He didn't understand that the quiet person is often the one who knows the most. And the person standing in the corner watching everything might be the person who owns the entire room. In the end, Richard lost more than his position. He lost the trust of the people who once believed in him. The company moved forward with new leadership, but the biggest change wasn't financial. It was the culture. Employees no longer felt afraid to speak. Ideas were valued. People were finally treated like people, not just numbers on a report. As for me, I learned a lesson I would never forget. You don't need to announce your success to prove your worth. You don't need everyone to know your power. Sometimes the strongest position is being underestimated. Because when people think you have nothing, they show you exactly who they are. Richard thought firing me would be the end of my story. He thought he was removing someone replaceable. But he never realized that the person he ignored for years was the one person who had been watching everything. And in the end, the quiet employee he dismissed became the person who owned the company.